Gibraltar is blessed with a rich variety of natural and human history. The rock and the town below have been home to many cultures and people over the centuries. The artifacts, monuments and memories that remain become our heritage, a common inheritance which we all share. And as Gibraltar moves forward and grows, it is up to us as a society to make sure this heritage endures and becomes a part of our future as well. Leading this effort is the Gibraltar Heritage Trust, an independent statutory body entrusted with the preservation of our heritage, whose aim it is to ensure that modern Gibraltar retains history and heritage at its heart. World War II is the greatest and most destructive conflict in human history. From 1939 to 45, the great powers of the world were involved in a state of total war. From the islands of the Pacific to the frozen fields of Russia and the deserts of North Africa. During the conflict, Gibraltar was heavily fortified and served a vital role controlling naval traffic in between the Mediterranean and Atlantic Ocean. Gibraltar came under aerial bombardment from Vichy France and Italian aircraft, and its harbour was subjected to attacks from Italian Royal Navy commandos. Though Gibraltar was never invaded, with the proposed Operation Felix never being realised. Still, Gibraltar is peppered with dozens of World War II era fortifications, and the Fortress of Gibraltar Group aims to uncover the whole picture of wartime Gibraltar.
I'm John Paul Latin and I belong to the Fortress of Gibraltar Group. We got together in 2015 and we decided on certain aims and objectives for the group. One of them was to create an archive of all defensive structures on the rock. We wanted to create a database and write down exactly where everything was and the state it was in and how it was built and who built it, and create a catalogue of all that. It's a mammoth task. It's something that will take us years, if not decades, to achieve. The next part of our organization is to endeavor to protect these structures. Not only are we satisfied with cataloging them, we want to protect them. We want to defend them and to make sure that they're here for future generations as part of our heritage. So we want to achieve that by educating, by teaching other people what the structures are all about.
My name is Reyes. My role in FOG is basically researcher and amateur historian. When we visit or survey a particular area, I try my best to find relevant documentation, which is sometimes a bit difficult. And in this particular moment, we're here on the south side of Sandy Bay, an area that maybe a lot of us have got used to seeing over the years, but never apportioning its relevance during the war. Just behind me we've got this pillbox that's toppled down. Originally obviously it wasn't like that, it's been subsided with the storms and all that. That was a machine gun pillbox covering the enfilading the actual beach. We have the remains of concrete walls that actually provided protection to this pillbox, and it's also protecting the entrance to that area that's known as caves. Obviously it must have been natural caves, and it was adapted and tunnel driven inside to provide a mini fort. And in there we have a multiple range of weaponry and accommodation. We've got machine guns covering the entrance and again enfilading the Sandy Bay. And we have two platforms there, and those are for what we called spigot mortars, which were basically a very Heath Robinson arrangement of a weapon that they invented from home guard use back in the UK. And they were fitted here in 1942, a bit too late, but anyway. Down on the northern side, we have very few remains left in actual Sandy Bay. That was called Sandy Bay North. We only have a pillbox that has toppled down now and a small lookout. There used to be concrete platforms with other embrasures, but obviously erosion has taken its toll as well. The role of these fortifications, and in particular this one, at the start of the war, was to prevent any enemy that actually landed on the beach to be able to get into the Admiralty tunnel. That was a vulnerable spot. If they got into the tunnel, they had direct access to the dockyard. So that had to be avoided at all costs. So that's why this area in particular is very heavily defended. There was nothing directly on the beach or in front of the beach, which is normally customary what you think of to defend a landing area. In this case, it was just shooting on the sides. Plus, remember, we had support from the catchment areas. We had mortars up there, we had mortars in Holy Land, and further on up on the ridge where the batteries are, Loderis, O'Hara's, they have mortars, and 2 4-inch guns up in Martin's Battery where Met Steps are. So all these guns would support the ground troops defending this area. You can see in one of them particular circular marks on the concrete. Originally they had stones or boulders stuck on the concrete to make it blend in with the surrounding area. I know for a fact that they had an officer, his role was the camouflage officer, and he would request official photographs to be taken of completed emplacements, and he would look at the results and recommend whether something had to be redone or it wasn't that effective. And there is a picture of that one in particular, and the officer was commenting that the actual camouflaging of it had been rendered useless because they've left all the construction debris around it.
My name is Victor Mide. I'm a member of the Fortress of Gibraltar Group. One of the things that I help out with is the surveying section of the pillboxes of bunkers all over the place. This site was primarily designed to protect the oil depots up above. So we find pillboxes all over the place, both beyond this rock face and all the way down to Catalan Bay. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the surveys picks up the current condition of the pillbox in terms of we do a visual inspection first. We record the state, the condition it's in, name it if possible, or find the name of it, its coordinates, and then if we feel that it warrants it, then we go in and carry out a physical survey of the place and draw it up, basically. We try to keep things as simple as possible, which is using measuring tape and devices such as this, which is a laser measuring device, which helps as well. Everything is meticulously measured and drawn up later to scale, yes. It's record keeping really for posterity, I hope, and you know, with the developments the way they're going now all over Gibraltar, I think it's important that we have a record of our Second World War heritage. It's our current heritage and our future heritage.
So you see behind me there's an area known as Iceland Crag, which has at least 5 known bunker positions, defensive structures. They range from 2 6-pounder Hotchkiss guns to a searchlight position and 2 observation posts, which can be used as rifle positions. What we'll do now is we'll go down and have a view of the bunkers at close range. Well, here we are in a gun emplacement at the end, at the very end of Sandy Bay, just before we get to Dudley Ward Tunnel, at sea level. This gun emplacement was built on a rocky outcrop below the road surface, and it had a particular use during the war. This gun emplacement would have housed a 6-pounder Hotchkiss gun, which would have been mounted on a mounting which you can see here. This is one of 2 mountings that we have in Gibraltar, another one being in Little Bay.
The Hotchkiss gun would have been housed in here, and if you look out the window, this firing arcs would have been straight down north down the beach. So essentially, if you fire this gun, it ends up at the northern end of Sandy Bay, maybe even into Catalan Bay. The idea of this gun, we believe, and this is a supposition on our part, was to protect the beach from any beach landings, from landing craft coming in and beaching itself, and then obviously the soldiers coming out of the landing craft and attacking the beach. This gun would have been able to hit the landing craft on its side. This is obviously supposition on our part because we don't have anything specifically written for this gun emplacement. But what helps us think about that this was the intended use for this gun was if you look on the sides, you see that there are grooves where there would have been a weight, a counterweight would have been housed here, and at the very top you can see that there's a hole. On the other side of the wall you can see that there is a frame for a shutter. By the thickness of the frame, we would have assumed it was an armor-plated shutter. And there's a couple of pulleys. The pulleys would have had the wire going through, and what we were assuming is that the shutter would have been closed at all times. Not only would it have protected the gun from the elements, the sea, but it would also have kept the gun hidden from the enemy until the last minute. A corporal or the gun commander could have been looking out through the observation slit on the outside and waited for the correct moment in time for him to say open fire, where the counterweights would have been released, the heavy shutter would have been opened, and the gun would have been exposed to the enemy, and they could have opened fire immediately. But that is what we believe. It's supposition on our part. Fire!
Here we're inside a pillbox, one of the largest ones still existing in Gibraltar, just by the entrance to Eastern Beach. Everyone would have seen it from outside. Its proper name is called Fort George. We have another one just opposite called Fort William. Again, some names in Scotland. These are forts that are located near Loch Ness, so obviously it was something familiar for the Black Watch to recognize. This formed part of a defense line which they called Slaughterhouse Line. Behind this building we used to have the old incinerator, or they used to call it the dust distractor, and in front of that we used to have the old slaughterhouse. That slaughterhouse had pillboxes inside the building as well, which would fire out to the beach and to the sea. And just in front of us we had another pillbox called Fort Augustus inside an existing building, and the famous Caledonian Canal, and that is an anti-tank ditch, an obstacle right from the beach right up to the rock face. This was basically called the main line of resistance. If this fell, the whole of Gibraltar was deemed lost, so this had to be defended at all costs. That's why a pillbox like this one was so heavily armed. This, believe it or not, could fire with a clear field of vision we don't have today. Had another role in that it had fixed targets on the Spanish side, where they built their own fortifications. So these guns were, in certain cases, earmarked to fire at those pillboxes. This one in particular has been converted later on in the war. Originally we had 4 embrasures and we had usual machine guns, Bren light guns, and we had a particular Hotchkiss 6-pounder, the same as the one we had in Sandy Bay. We've got one of the embrasures for the Bren gun, and these are special clamps that you cannot find them anywhere else, even in the UK. These were locally designed, and basically you would use a particular tripod that the Bren gun had. You bent it and you collapsed it, put it here, and you had clamps. It's a locally made design. The most interesting part is in the exterior of this building. Originally it was camouflaged and made to look like a cottage or like a house. A few years ago it still had the remains of the ceramic tiles, and there's evidence, and we've seen pictures of Fort William, which had the same thing, actually having a pitched roof, probably made of wood. and the actual OP was camouflaged as a chimney. And on the outside, most probably the actual embrasures would have been painted up to look like normal windows with blinds or something like that. I can't see the trace of that, but we've seen it in other pictures, and that's probably the whole idea. You can see the main area and placement for the main armament of this pillbox. You can see the holdfast for a later 6-pounder anti-tank gun that they fitted in 1944. Originally had the 6-pounder Hotchkiss, a small one like in Sandy Bay. And you can see, if we look up on the ceiling, we can see that the original embrasure has been altered quite a bit to accommodate the later gun. You can see that we've got the remains of the ricochet wall right at the ceiling, whilst on the bottom one it's been cut. So it gives the indication that the original armament was further back, and that will give you a roughly nearly 2 meters thick reinforced concrete wall at the front. So it was designed to withstand heavy shelling. The idea was that you had to protect, obviously, Eastern Beach. It was a major point for landing, and most importantly was the isthmus, which was, as correctly thought, the Germans would launch an attack through the isthmus. It's difficult to imagine. We've got some pictures, but it was very heavily fortified. It was a mainline resistance, so you had to hold it no matter what. It's a very important area, and you can see by the construction of this building its importance.
In 1942, the British and American Allied powers, under the command of American General Dwight Eisenhower, who was stationed in Gibraltar, executed Operation Torch, an invasion of North Africa that would open up a second front in the war and would ultimately lead to the invasion and surrender of Italy, a critical victory that gave the Allies the advantage to win the war in 1945. Recently, deep within Gibraltar's vast network of wartime tunnels, the Fortress of Gibraltar Group, with the collaboration of author Nicholas Rankin, would uncover a fascinating insight into Gibraltar's significant role in this crucial chapter of the Second World War.
We're here at the moment in the middle galleries, particularly in Upper Union Gallery. Behind me we've got one of the embrasures, one of several in this part of the tunnels. And behind me you can see a structure. We could say this is one of the most important parts of Gibraltar's history during World War II. This is one of the SOE, Special Operations Executive Radio Rooms, that was set up during the war and actually helped immensely in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. We realized it wasn't much of a, not really a discovery, but more of an identification of its use during the war. I have to give credit to the British author Nicholas Rankin, close friend of ours, and in one of his research trips to Kew in National Archives, he found this file on SOE, and in it he found some papers written in French and some pictures. It turns out that these French papers are basically a diary of a person called Hugh Mallory Falconer. He became a squadron leader. He was technically in the RAF, but he was in SOE. He was a wireless transmission expert. He'd been in the French Foreign Legion before the war for about 5 years. Basically, the pictures he sent me, the most important one was this one. And you can see there's an arrow. And this was done by this gentleman, Hugh Mallory Falconer. And he had the audacity to, apart from writing a diary, which was totally illegal, he actually took pictures of where he was working. So from this picture we managed to identify from the outside which embrasure it was. We came in and we just counted from the bottom up. And we came to this one. And once we got in, we had these two pictures to further confirm. Once we were inside this room, we referred to one of the pictures that Falconer had taken. And turning around, we immediately saw that the same doorway was there. same corrugated sheeting, and most importantly of all, this piece of wood here, this plank. And there's a radio underneath. Once we had the closer inspection of the wood, we could see there's some white stickers on them. And some of them you can still see names. He managed to identify this one in particular, Ramon. In the documents he had on him is a contact actually in Pamplona. He was one of the wireless contacts. This room was purely a radio room, wireless transmitting room, with the antenna just outside the embrasure. And these contacts, apart from Ramon, we have contacts in Portugal, in North Africa, we have contacts in Spain, and later on we found that we have contacts in Oran and Algiers. Then going further to the documents, we started to look into the diary this man had written. It came to light that in December 1941, being a wireless transmitting expert, he'd been sent out in Portugal, he sent out to Spain and to Tangiers to set up wireless contacts, train people to operate wireless transmitters, basically to contact Gibraltar. Gibraltar was, for the SOE, the hub of the communications, so they all contacted Gibraltar, and Gibraltar would contact London, the War Office, via cable and wireless. After he came here, he needed a room to work from, especially in this side of the rock, and he was allocated this room, or hole as he used to name it, that actually belonged or was allocated to the governor at that time, Lord Gort, as part of his battle headquarters. And basically it was a very rudimentary affair, just a couple of tables, a light on top, and that's it. Later on he had to alter and build a more substantial structure like we see now because of problems with water ingress and humidity. He brought over better equipment, better radio equipment, bought on the black market in the UK, and he managed to have excellent contacts and perfect contacts with the north of Africa, with Tangiers, with Casablanca, with Rabat. He did find he had the problem able to contact on the west side, Oran and Algiers. For that, to solve that problem, he set up another radio station on the east side, initially in a small tunnel just at the exit of the water reservoirs tunnel. Not very suitable, but it would make do. Later on, he got rid of that one and established a better one up inside Holy Land Tunnel, which we've actually managed to identify where it is. It's sealed up, but who knows, maybe one day we can open it up. Apart from that, he brought himself a couple of generators. He was fully independent from the outside power. He'd suffered power cuts before, and he was instructed to be totally dependent. He had 5 sergeants with him, which were the wireless operators. He brought himself even a mechanic, a corporal tribe, to take care of the generators. And actually for Operation Torch, which was its main role, or most important role, they slept and lived in here whilst the operation was going on, and even days after. And so we set up 3 detachments of wireless operators in conjunction with the Americans, with the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA. The Americans still had consular services in the north of Africa. But apart from that, for Operation Torch, SOE set up 3 detachments, each with their own wireless operator. Each one of them was sent alongside one of the 3 each of the invading locations for the North African operation. Once the operation was occurring, it was noticed that the army radios in the actual invasion were not working, and no contact was being achieved with Gibraltar. Remember that General Eisenhower was here as the chief commander, so he couldn't communicate with his troops and with the British troops as well. So the only way they could do it, or the way he could solve the problem, was using the radios that these SOE detachments had, which were better quality. And thanks to them, they were able to transmit all these military and important messages from the invading armies to Gibraltar, to the commander and obviously as well to London. And this carried on days after the actual invasion had taken place, as the army radios were not working. At the time of Operation Torch, such was the importance of maintaining of the radios and listening and transmitting, that Hugh Mallory, Falconer, had his team of 5 sergeants and his mechanic corporal to look after the generator. They were stationed inside here permanently. They were living here during the operation and days after. And you can see evidence just behind me of remains of an oven, probably coal-fired. We have a couple of wash basins there, some water tanks. So this would have been the kitchen for them. This, I think, emphasizes the importance of the whole operation, seeing as the majority of the garrison in Gibraltar were never permanently stationed inside the tunnels of the rock. These gentlemen were. I think that demonstrates the importance of the operation, the amount of traffic they had, of signals traffic they had to transmit and receive and pass on. Apparently it's from 17 messages from day 1 to about 39 on day 2. And I think it highlights the relevance of this area. The importance of this room is evident in that without these communication facilities set up here in the middle galleries and the other one in Holy Land, the communications with the troops and the invasion army in Operation Torch would have been impossible. So much so that the US Admiral Hall actually admitted that without these communications through SOE radios, it would have been impossible to carry on with the invasion. It would have been a total shambles. I think, in my personal opinion, this is one of the most important areas of wartime Gibraltar, and actually was, you could say, in action in an invasion.
The Fortress of Gibraltar. In Gibraltar we breathe military. Everything to do with Gibraltar has to have a military side to it, at least it used to. I know we're moving away now, we're developing into a more modern society. So I remember when I growing up with resident battalions and everything, every nook and cranny in Gibraltar had a fortification, a bunker, an OP, an observation post, all the tunnels on the rock. As you can see behind me, there's bunkers everywhere, there's nooks and crannies, and the whole of the rock just breathes military. World War II history in Gibraltar is our heritage. It is firmly part of our heritage. The Gibraltar identity was formed during the Second World War with the evacuation, with the people suffering, the menfolk that stayed behind to defend Gibraltar. And we feel that the World War II structures around the rock is just as much a part of our heritage as a Great Siege was, as Nelson in Rosia Bay was, as any other part of our history.